You're listening to a podcast of spurious morality.
Hello and welcome to a podcast of Spurious Morality. I'm Johnston and with me today I have Gareth. Hello.
Hi there.
And we are carrying on with our adventure through the monthly range of Doctor Who from Big Finish. 275 adventures to get through, and we're starting today with 34, so we're doing quite well. It feels like we're into it now. Well, like when we very first started this and we were in the teens and it was like, oh, this is going very slowly, isn't it? And it's already starting to feel a bit samey and that kind of thing. But it seems to have opened out a little bit. I do think that the introduction of McGann kind of made a big difference. And obviously we talked about the second sort of series of McGann within the range last time. But now we're just back to classic Doctors and their adventures. The first one of which we're going to discuss is... it's got a reputation for being a bit of a banger. It's Spare Parts. So tell us how you reviewed it.
Okay, it's a bit of a long one, I'm afraid, but we'll get through it. I've never been that impressed with Cybermen. They were, by a clear margin, the best attempt to make the Daleks happen again. Sorry, mechanoids, war machines. And they can be very effective. Look how often they came back. But somewhere between their tendency to nervously swap out their design between stories as if unsure what will work for the audience, and the stories themselves favouring base under siege monstering rather than anything like the creative heights of the Daleks, say conjuring them from mirrors, tells me that they're just a bit more standard monsterish than the Pepperpots. They shouldn't be. The Cybermen are a terrifying idea. Desperate people driven to replace their bodies with machinery, losing so much of themselves that all they know how to do is that, but to everyone they meet. There's a lot of potential there to scare the hell out of audiences. But to my mind, they really did it, relying on here come the zombies cliffhangers. It's a popular fandom argument to make, but I'm not at all surprised that the Borg were such a success, taking a similar idea and making the really upsetting part the whole point. I'm not saying there aren't any good Cyberman stories, but Spare Parts is the best one by a couple of football fields. Prequels, like parallel universes, are surprisingly rare in classic Doctor Who. Everybody loves Genesis of the Daleks, but is their origin story really more interesting than poor old Mondas? I would argue no. Not for the Cybermen, World War II's thematic hand-me-downs. The fate of Mondas is pure human drama, blended with a nightmarish brand of speculative sci-fi. We're lucky someone went in there and showed it, well, on audio, and luckier that it came over so well. The use of the Fifth Doctor is inspired. Post Adric, he's in a unique position to reassess the Cybermen, and perhaps his position on changing history as well, since he failed to get it right the first time in Earthshock. Peter Davison is superb here, teasing the possibility of altering history, always wanting it to be the Mondasian's own choice rather than his. Mark Platt's use of the Doctor's own physiognomy to help the Cybermen along is also a great bit of irony. Sarah Sutton is terrific here as well. The more forthright Nyssa we've come to know from Big Finish is explicitly positioned as a response to Adric's death, and Spare Parts is maybe the best example of that, as she tells off strangers and challenges the Doctor. The Remember Adric plot point would risk getting rather pat later on, but it's perfect here. The audio format is kind to the story, with necessity driving a smaller cast, and so focusing it all on the troubled family. Mondas is a heartbreaking world of make, do, and mend, an example of the awful things that people might simply accept as normal in bad enough circumstances. It's to Platt's credit that he works in various bits of canon and makes them feel organic, with a little bit of Earthshock score sneaking around. Cybermats, a local nuisance. Cybermen, a necessary body upgrade to survive the planet's surface. And even the word Cyberman established as local colour, with Doctor Man, Sister Man as well. Even though the story is a fandom white whale, the humanity and horror feel like more than a ticked box. And yeah, it's grim. The fate of Yvonne is perhaps the single strongest idea in the piece, but the casual bleakness of the organ trail, sorry, the organ trade, very different thing there, and the deathly unemotional committee that sits behind Mondas, blandly stating, "We must survive," when challenged, drives home the actual depths of the Cybermen better than a robot menacing a screaming girl. The sound design is a phenomenal bonus here, making superb use of the original, unfairly overlooked cyber voices from the 10th planet. Received wisdom used to tell us these were silly, but as I get older, I think their broken, random cadence is a much more original counterpoint to a Dalek vocoder. Quite frankly, after Yvonne, I don't know what could sound more upsetting than this. The committee come a close second. They sound very similar to the original Cylon voices from Battlestar Galactica, but that ferocious, buzzing monotone is terrifying in its own way. There's ultimately a question here of whether this really is a story of its own, beyond just retelling the Cybermen's origin. What can the Doctor change? I don't know if he's convinced by the smoother path Mondas seems to be on as he leaves, but a note of hope was probably the only way that the Doctor and Nissa were leaving here without having forever nightmares. The listeners have no such luck, finding out in no uncertain terms that normal service will resume. Spare Parts leaves us with an attempt to do something in the face of awfulness that won't make much of a difference, really, which shouldn't deter you from trying. That's a very Fifth Doctor impulse, which again brings this back to a solid character piece and not just fan service, even if the fans got everything they wanted or were afraid of with this one. So lots to say, but what I will add is that I think this was one of, if not the first big finishes I heard. Which I know I said that about the Holy Terror. It was in the same bunch, so the bar was set pretty high for me with this one.
What a start. Wow. Um, I like this one. Now, this one often gets sort of called one of the best ever. I don't think it is. I think it's very, very, very good. I think we're definitely in 8, 9 out of 10 territory, but I just it doesn't quite cross the line for me. And there's a few reasons for this. It is excellent. It's a fantastic production. Peter Davison, Sarah Sutton are wonderful. It's beautifully written. It's an incredibly strong character piece, like you say. Um, it just seems to it gets a bit lost in itself. Sort of by part four, we seem to be in totally different territory to part one. It doesn't really feel like part one has led to part four. It just feels as though, okay, we need to move the story on now. So we have. But the whole bit with Yvonne, yeah, it's brilliant. It's heartbreaking, and Yvonne's family really are the sort of the heartbeat of the story. But they're barely in the final episode because we're more interested in what's going on at the palace now. And I find it just descends into, frankly, a lot of noise. The committee doesn't help. Like I find the committee to be very difficult to sort of follow. It's not very clear, I don't think. I think it's been a bit over edited. And that takes away a little bit from me, I think. Um, yeah, I don't know. It kind of fizzles out and then picks up from where it left off the moment the TARDIS departs, which I can see being effective, and I can't really see any other way this story would end. But it just doesn't quite come with the level of satisfaction that I think most feel. It's very, very good though, and like the world building and character stuff is top tier.
Yeah, I don't think any of that's unfair. I do think that the story has like a problem from the outset. Like you say, how do you end this? Because it's, well, Genesis of the Daleks had the same kind of thing, but at least they had an imperative to get back to the TARDIS, whereas in this, it's a self-contained adventure. Um, yeah, so I think the Doctor has to be slightly fobbed off with this solution in order to get him out of there. Yeah, I suppose I would say it's not perfect, but for me, the angle I tend to come at this from, as I said, is I tend to find the Cybermen a little bit middling. I don't think it's not like it's not their fault, like they're real. It's like the writers don't always approach them in as creative a way as they do the Daleks. And that's not to say there aren't loads of boring Dalek stories. We'll come against one soon that is very, very offbeat, but most of them aren't like that for the Cybermen. So for this one, it's just the fact that I come away from it really with a strong sense of what they are and why that's upsetting, but also tragically inevitable in this case. It's like, yeah, it just makes the case for the Cybermen in a way that I think is not unheard of, but rare on the TV. So yeah, for me, that kind of it sort of puts a foot on the scales for this one.
It does do a fantastic job of doing something a bit different with the Cybermen, and it's it's not the obvious version of that story as well. Like, I kind of feel as though, because this was essentially remade as Rise of the Cybermen: Age of Steel. In fact, I think Mark Platt even got a credit
He does get
in one of
credit.
his
It's pretty
episodes.
loose
Yeah,
adaptation, but yeah,
a
he
lot of the
gets a nod.
concepts are there. Um, but I feel like this does it in a less obvious way. I think maybe because this is on Mondas, whereas Rise of the Cybermen's on an alternate Earth, but still recognisably Earth. I think the sort of alien society aspect of it kind of makes a difference.
Yeah. Plus, it's more, spare parts is kind of the Blitz, whereas Rise of the Cybermen is much more kind of modern satire. So they're sort of going at different angles.
Yes. I don't know. I think this just has a more interesting story to tell. I also think it was a more original story when this first came out. Um, I think it was one of the first big finishes I heard as well, purely because I'd read that this was considered to be one of the best and therefore sought it out as like one of the ones that I need to go to. And yeah, it's just never sat with me as being quite so deserving of its reputation. Like I say, it's up there. It's you can't listen to this and not recognise that you're listening to top tier Doctor Who, but it's not quite there for me. But it's by no means a bad story, and it is an interesting use of the Cybermen, and there aren't many of those. And the 60s Cyberman voices, particularly the 10th Planet ones, they're so haunting. They're so good.
Mm.
I completely agree with you there. Should we move on to the next one?
Please.
Okay, well, this next one then is Ish, which is even more experimental, I guess. Over to you.
Okay. I love this one, but I'm hard pressed to explain exactly why. It's a perfect synthesis. Sorry, start that again. It's a perfect synthesis of doctor and subject matter, with the most loquacious incarnation attending a symposium and then battling a word monster for the fate of language itself. Colin Baker dives into it headfirst and deftly handles all of the verbiage. At one point, he makes a joke about Samuel Johnson, as played by Robbie Coltrane in Blackadder III, a performance not unlike the Sixth Doctor at times. Nicola Bryant is also excellent here, with the story taking full advantage of an American companion. Americanisms are crucial to the resolution. Ish puts this Doctor and companion combo at a rather civilized state of bickering, neither quite season 22 grump nor season 23 affection. It works for this one. The story makes excellent use of sound. Well, it would have to, since words are its only weapons. But for example, the gentle modulation on Moray Treadwell's voice, playing Book, a hologram, enhances an already mellifluous performance. I thought he was Miles Richardson for a while. God, I can't speak in this one, which is quite ironic given the subject matter. Anyway, perhaps the best thing about it is that it's a story given over entirely to non corporeal ideas, which you don't see or hear often. No monsters, not really any villains, just concepts causing a ruckus. It sounds complicated, but any listener will be familiar with the idea that any word repeated often enough loses all meaning. Extrapolated to extremes, that becomes an alarming threat to our understanding of the world around us, and so it makes for a good, scary story. If I seem uncertain, since after all I've listed several perfectly good things about it, it's probably because the story itself, pound for pound, isn't very big, so I feel as though I'm missing something. There's a locked room mystery for a while, then some mistaken identity, and of course the threat of a huge language virus. But it's sort of 60-40 between doing all that and just enjoying its own concept. Treadwell's subtle performances book is probably the highlight, followed closely by Colin hopscotching his way through the dictionary. I'll bet there are brilliantly articulate reviews out there that really get to grips with the meaning of ish. I feel a bit defeated by it, so I'll just say that it's a weird place to be for 4 episodes, but I'm glad to go there. Yeah, I mean, sound wise, it's one of their best, strongest productions. I think you can just something about that guy's voice. I don't know, really kind of takes this story away.
It's curious because I'm in pretty much the same boat as you. Like, I like it. I know I like it. I enjoy listening to it. And then the moment it finishes, I do kind of struggle to go, well, this was the bit I liked. It's an all round good production. And you're right, there's some excellent sound work in there. And yet again, the Sixth Doctor and Perry are in an adventure that really, really uses the fact that we are on audio as a medium. Obviously, Whispers of Terror did the same right back at the start. This is obviously a bit more word focused than audio focused, but it's still dealing with that concept of sound. Um, yeah, it's a difficult one to follow, but it is all there. It's not like it's not doing a ghost light. It's not leaving you to put the jigsaw together yourself. I guess it's all sort of a nice coherent story. But yeah, it's good. It's good. It has good characters, and I think that it's a shame we don't have more like this. But then there is some kind of, to me certainly, and it sounds like you too, that there is some kind of barrier to just like fully absorbing it. I've probably heard this 3 times, I'd guess. And I don't feel as though I've actually got any more out of it on time number 3 than I did on time number 1, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but how many times do I have to hear this before I do kind of have that clicky moment of, oh, that's what it's doing, particularly in the final part.
Yeah, I mean, I believe the author of this one, I think, is it Phil Pascoe? This is his only contribution. But at the same time, there are a couple of big finishes that do something similar. Whispers of Terror, obviously, yeah, we've already done that one. Um, Iterations of I in the fifth Doctor box set, years and years later, that does a very similar type of thing. So I don't know
Yes.
how that's. We'll probably get to it one day, but yeah, that's kind of the nature of experimental releases. I mean, it's like the Holy Terror. You can't do that every month. But,
Yeah.
it's nice, to, give it a try.
And I'm glad they did, and I'm glad they sort of continue to do so. There's going to be a point where we sort of see less of this kind of release, and it'll be interesting to see if we sort of spot where that kicks in terms of as we go. I mean, in my head, the range gets a little bit less creative around 100, but I don't know whether that's something I've picked up in the past or just an arbitrary number I've kind of thrown out there. But there's definitely a turning point when all of a sudden you don't really get stories that are not necessarily stories like this that are going very specifically for this kind of thing, but just ones that are a bit weird and out there and different. I could be wrong. It could be that we're hearing 150 releases time, and I'm still waiting for it to get a bit less experimental.
It would be
I
very
don't know.
nice if that happens. I do think we will definitely miss Ish. Like, we will reach a point where we go, not those were the days in that it's not good anymore, but yeah, we will look back and go, "I wish we had weird one-offs like this." But
Yes.
yeah, like you, I'm excited to kind of see if that's true or if I'm just being pessimistic.
Yeah, because I'm exactly the same. It's very easy to go, oh, around 100 it gets a little bit less experimental, but that's not necessarily the case. We shall see. When I think of what's in the early hundreds, you've got a Klein trilogy and you've got various other bits. You've got Key to Time, which regardless of whether you like it or not, it's definitely experimental in places. Um, so yes, we'll see. But for now, we will move on to our next adventure, which is it's one that we've discussed before on this podcast, actually, because we've sort of talked a little bit about it with Joseph Lidster, and it's The Rapture, which was his first ever story. I've never made any secret of the fact that this is one of my favourites. I thoroughly enjoy it, despite the flaws that are quite obvious. But I will I will let you discuss those in a bit more detail, as I'm sure you do.
Okay. All right. This one's a bit different, and right away, I've got to say, hats off to the production. The front cover and theme music are brilliantly committed to the bit, i.e., dance music and the club scene. The Rapture is one of the more unsung examples of Big Finish releases that make the most of the audio medium. I mean, Tony Blackburn's in it. The story is very low key and character focused. Joe Lidster, in his first release, makes clever use of previous continuity, picking up on something that really bothered me about dust breeding, Ace letting someone else do the rescuing, as a deliberate character fault. Much is also made of Ace's burnout at the end of Colditz, hence the Doctor trying to take her somewhere nice, in this case, Ibiza. Sadly, as we all know, there's no such thing as a holiday in Doctor Who, so the hottest new club is actually run by aliens brainwashing people. As if that weren't distracting enough, Ace runs into her long lost brother, stirring even more feelings. There's angst for the people being brainwashed, particularly Catriona, who gets a brilliantly trippy nightmare involving the Doctor and Blackburn, and even for the brainwashers, who have their own not wholly evil reasons for doing what they do. Not that any of this is bad, but the further you get from the initial germ of the rapture, Ace being in a bad place, the sketchier I think it gets. The story doesn't make very much of the actual threat of the brainwashing, so it never feels like a crisis is about to kick off. And the aliens are so morally grey, apart from a few very specific lapses, one of which is easily fixed, that it's almost anticlimactic at the end. The drama of Ace's brother is arguably a non starter, despite some tearful scenes, as we know it's unlikely to be revisited in the series, and Ace's development in itself is a mixed bag. It's not Lidster's fault, but the whole whipped up crisis of don't call me this cool nickname anymore, I'm grown up, call me a different cool nickname, is just a bit juvenile. Finally, sorry, quite a few gripes here, there are too many scenes of the Doctor psychoanalyzing people. Since he tells them how they feel or why they do things, they themselves don't need to figure that out, which adds to the general sense of anticlimax. That's a lot of moaning, I know, but I still liked The Rapture. It has a genuinely offbeat focus for a Doctor Who story, right down to the villains, and it's creative as an audio production. There's drugs and much more swearing than you'd ever expect in Doctor Who, and they're not treated as particularly edgy things, all of which makes this one stand out even more. It's a bit of a swing and a miss, maybe, but at least it gave Joe Lidster his start. Great things to come there. I do wonder, just generally, if having a particular fondness for this sort of music and this sort of kind of and scene and stuff makes a bit of a difference. I'm not particularly interested. I wonder if that's kind of a fork in the road here because like you really love this, so and you know you like a bit of DJing yourself, so I don't know. Maybe this just speaks to you on a more personal level.
Um, no, I don't think it is that. Yes, I do. I like the soundtrack and I like that part of it, but I actually think it's mostly what it's trying to do, which is a very offbeat character piece in a location that you would never associate with Doctor Who in a million years.
Mm.
Um, it's they were trying to do something with Ace at this point, the whole McShane thing, and as you mentioned, it kind of echoes on from Dust Breeding and Colditz. Um, and while that never really panned out and never really worked out, this felt like good progress for Ace. It feels as though before the big sort of Ace progress reset button gets hit with the Harvest, it's a long time before we see Ace again now, by the way. Um, it's sort of this was a good place for it to be going. Of course, Ace has got a long lost brother, and of course, that's gonna change your perspective on things. And I do think it's a shame that that's never been revisited. I again, it wasn't perfect. It's not the best part of the story, but it's good drama. It's just interesting drama, and it's a very interesting direction. Not just to take Doctor Who, but to take Ace, very specifically Ace as a character. And the Seventh Doctor gets to be a bit manipulative here. Like you say, he does a lot of psychoanalyzing of people, and it's fairly surface level stuff for him. And he genuinely has the rug pulled out from under him when it turns out Gustavo's in league with the aliens and is partly responsible for what's going on, and his kind of anti-fascist views and views on life being distorted to basically have him fund not very nice things happening to young people. Yeah, there's just a lot going on. I love the sound design. I love the atmosphere that this story creates as well. I think it is just so different. It's just so out there. And we've had a lot of very different stories. We've had a lot of experimental stories, but this isn't that. This is Doctor Who very much dragged to earth in a way that it never has been before or since at all. It just gets points for uniqueness. Uniqueness, sound design, brilliant writing, and it's just McCoy and Ace being McCoy and Ace, but different to how you normally see them.
I think that's fair.
It's when we had Joseph Lidster on here, he did sort of admit he feels as though the first half is a lot stronger than the second half. I'm in complete agreement there. I think parts 1 and 2 of this are top, big finish. But it does maybe drop off a little bit towards the end, and it's not as powerful as it should be. And I think, for the reasons you discussed, sort of, well, actually, the villains don't feel like they're that much of a threat. We're kind of not really certain as to what that threat is. But I guess that uncertainty is kind of part of the whole weird, fantastical, psychedelic feeling of the story anyway. I guess it kind of works well with that, even though I suspect that's probably unintentional.
From my perspective, because I know you liked it a good deal more than I did, I still find it enjoyable to listen to a story like this where I kind of think it's got issues because I know the writer went on to kind of eliminate those issues. So the stuff about this that I don't think really works, I don't really remember seeing or rather hearing in anything else he's done. Um, I just quite enjoy kind of tracking people's progress in that way. Like I've recently been reading some of Terry Pratchett's early books, and you kind of read them and go, "Oh God, no! Why isn't he doing that thing he did later on?" And then you're like, "This is why he started doing that." So in this one where I felt there were scenes where the Doctor's kind of telling people uh, why they're doing stuff, although there is a sort of interesting psychological component there. That kind of narrative sort of dead end. I don't think it's something he would do again. And you think when we get to Master, obviously we'll get to it, and we've already talked about it somewhat. Um, that's a pretty sophisticated script all through. So it's this is early, by no means bad, but interesting. I think. However, whether or not you like it, I think it's interesting.
And it's a damn good first effort because, like you say, stuff does get ironed out pretty quickly with Joe Lidster. He turned into one of the best people writing for the Whoniverse pretty damn quick. One to discuss when Master comes along, I guess. Interesting you should mention Terry Pratchett because Terry Pratchett is one that has eluded me. This is totally off topic. One that eluded me in the sense of I've just never quite got into him, and I think the problem I've had is I've always tried starting with Colour of Magic, and everyone tells me don't do that. Start with one that's later and then go back to it. And I will at some point. But yes,
You can pick
that
and
was off
choose.
piece. Yeah,
Yeah,
there's no order, is
I'll
there?
I'll message you. I've got some recommendations. We'll
Yes,
do that.
Grafty's Guide to Terry Pratchett. I mean, um, okay. Well, let's move on to our next story then, which is I find this one interesting because it's another one that I think I like, but I can't quite tell you why. But I'm going to see what you think of it first.
Okay. The Sandman, then. This one has some really good ideas, but struggles to balance them against a dramatic story. The first episode tells us all about the Clutch, a nomadic group of spaceships run by the once warlike Galliari. There's a lot of world building here, and the Sixth Doctor regales Evelyn with all of it. Then it turns out the Doctor is a mythical figure to the Galliari, the Sandman, and deliberately so. He returns periodically to frighten them. This is a great shock, perhaps especially to Evelyn, who he might have thought to brief in advance. But then, if he did that, we wouldn't have episode 2, where we are regaled yet more with the Galliari's past and the Doctor's part in it. It takes until episode 3 and a cliffhanger resolution that would definitely annoy Annie Wilkes, since we straight up cheat our way around it, for the plot to really get moving. The Doctor has dug himself into a neat little hole. He has been the Sandman so he can scare the Galliari straight, but someone else is going around doing bad things under that name. This might be the first time ever that the Doctor actually deserves to be on the hook for murder when he arrives, since he's worked so hard for that exact reputation. What's actually going on involves even more exposition, and to be honest, I started losing the thread before the end. It's too much lore and not enough movement. There's even another bit of backstory to go over what we learned in episode 2 from a different perspective. Simon A. Ford is clearly a great ideas man, but this one could have used a reshuffle to get things moving a bit sooner. It's a good production with strong performances from Ian Hogg and Annika Wills. The latter continues the tradition of companions like Caroline John doing guest parts. Wills makes an excellent embittered Galliari. Colin Baker clearly relishes the booming villain part, whereas there isn't much for Maggie Stables to do, even though there's a bit of money on the table about Evelyn not being able to trust him anymore. Also, not really relevant, but I'm pretty sure the part of Mordekin was written for an American, what with Buddy, Guy, Butt, and Lady. He's Irish in this. I recently read Forward's first Doctor Who novel, Drift, which has a similar issue to The Sandman, too much going on. I still like what he's putting out there, but I hope there's some collaboration in future to tease out the information a bit and up the pace. For now, this is a decent but slightly stodgy listen. Just to go back to that cliffhanger. So I think the end of the episode is your kind of Caves of Androzani people shooting at the Doctor and Evelyn. And then in the next episode, they insert a shot of them diving in through a door before the guns go off. And I just thought of Misery because, Annie really hates that Flash Gordon thing where the character would escape in a way that wasn't established the previous week. And I did think that was a bit cheeky, but hey ho, had to happen sometime, I guess.
And not out of line with classic Doctor Who. It pulled that one a few
Not
times.
really. No.
I still think the worst offender is it the end of part 1 of Image of the Fendal? Sort of Leela opens the door and a gun goes off. And then all of a sudden in part 2, Leela opens the door and then ducks back behind the door and then the gun goes off.
She's
So
very
it's,
fast. What can you say?
yes. I mean, well, no, she had a week to get behind that door, but still. Yes, very cheeky. So yeah, this is so world building heavy. In fact, there's more world building than there is plot, which is
Mhm.
fine. I'm okay with it. But I would have liked a few more things to have happened. First of all, I I'm more interested in the idea of the clutch. Like, I'd rather the clutch be world built as opposed to the Galliari's past as heavily as it is. Um, but the stuff about the Galliari's past is important to kind of build up the actual threat of the story to you. So that's it's necessary. I get it. So part of me sort of thinks we should be spending more time here. This could be a location that we revisit. This could be a location that the Doctor visits across different like time zones. And I know the Galliari do return in a later release. I can't remember which one it is off the top of my head.
I think the Galliari and or the Clutch are in the Bernice Summerfield stories. I don't know about Doctor Who.
Yes. Is
Probably
it
are,
Dream?
but
I think it's Dreamtime.
that sounds like a Simon A. Forward one, yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Dreamtime. So there's something about it that harks back to this anyway. The Clutch isn't in it, but I'm fairly sure the Galliari are. That's one that I just have no memory of whatsoever. So I'm looking forward to us getting to. Um, Yeah, it's got everything there to be a really, really good story, but feels as though it just kind of misses the mark a little bit. And I think you've probably hit the nail on the head in terms of why there. But yeah, we do seem to spend a lot of time drifting back into the past, and actually, the Doctor's villainous reputation on the Clutch seems to not have the impact that it could have done as a result, as does sort of what's going on with various other characters and that kind of thing. It just becomes a bit of a runaround, and it's quite easy to get lost in its own lore, which is quite impressive considering it's only a sort of 90, 100-minute long story. Because it gives you a lot. It gives you an awful lot to work with, but doesn't really give you an awful lot to interpret. It's just sort of facts, 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 facts. Which, again, not a problem, but I think it just takes away from what's going on actually in the story a little bit, and as a result, it sort of falls into forgettable territory. Um, but I definitely like the concept of the Clutch and the concept of the Doctor actually being a villain to somebody historically as well. It's a pretty cool idea, and probably one that would only work with certain doctors. The Sixth Doctor is definitely one of those doctors it does work with. I can see it working with Seven, but I can't see Davison popping up in this one somehow. Um,
It's the best idea in it, and I do think it does complement Colin because he's the Doctor you don't necessarily trust out of most of them because of that early period. So the idea that he could actually be really, really dodgy, it's not something the story really has much of a chance to convince us of, but I think it's a really fun kind of gimmick for this Doctor in particular.
yeah. I guess that the way it works, particularly the second part, which is just one big info dump, is kind of doing what the first episode of The Keeper of Charkan does. Like the Doctor and Adric barely leave the TARDIS while someone just sits there giving them the complete history of Charkan. It worked there, but then we moved on to 3 episodes of genuine threat. Whereas with this, it just feels like it's stop, start, stop, start, stop, start all the way through. And it doesn't really feel like the flashbacks or what's happening in the current situation particularly go anywhere as a result. Whereas the Keeper of Shark, and it turns out it was the Master all along. But yeah, it's not a story I don't enjoy. I just think, if anything, it probably needs to be a bit longer, or it needs a sequel or something. Or at the very least, maybe they'd have sort of taken a format that they will use in the not too distant future and do it as a two-parter and then another two-parter that's all connected as a loose four-parter, same as Project Lazarus. That could have worked. Like they could have done the full historical story for 2 episodes and the full current story for 2 episodes. That might have worked a bit better.
Right.
Meanwhile, we've still got something to enjoy. Speaking of things I enjoy, let's move on to The Church and the Crown. I'm a big fan of this one. I'm a big fan of Perry and Erimem historicals in general. I just think they work. I think it's the perfect TARDIS team for them. But yeah, fire away with your review.
Okay. I'll start with a disclaimer. I stupidly tried listening to this and multitasking with work. Sometimes I can do that, but apparently this Monday had other ideas, so I may not have given The Church and the Crown my full attention. That said, it's still pretty accessible even when you're one ear down. A pure historical was a good idea for Erimem's next adventure, and this one makes a point of scrutinizing what sort of dynamic the Doctor, Perry, and Erimem will have as an ongoing team. In short, it's quite a funny one, with the ex-Pharaoh's regal bearing throwing a spanner into the usual works. Doctor Who companions regularly bring a modern sensibility to historical settings, and it's a delight to see Erimem do it in reverse. The script by Mark Wright and Cavan Scott is a surprisingly light and frothy one. These are the Project Twilight guys, after all. This one's a jolly outing in King Louis's court, with musketeers and Cardinal Richelieu circling each other and a dastardly duke outfoxing them all. Perhaps inevitably, for a light historical, one of the companions is a dead ringer for someone else. This gives Nicola Bryant a great opportunity to flex her acting muscles. Peter Davison, meanwhile, gives off a sense of fun, particularly when interacting with a cat that seems to like him even less than Tegan did. Even the Doctor is moved to say that this one was all a bit of fun, and it's hard to disagree. I wish there were more historicals like this. What I will add is that since writing that, I have crammed the story again. um, I don't actually have a lot more to say about it other than it is just extremely witty. I really enjoy the fact that sort of everybody's preconceptions are a bit wrong. So we come to this, and Perry, quite rightly, says, "All right, Musketeers, well, Richelieu's the bad guy then." And the Doctor defends him. And your first impulse as a listener is to kind of go, well, he's giving him too much benefit of the doubt. But then that turns out to be wrong. And the Musketeers and Richelieu, although perhaps not on the same side, are not as antagonistic as they might seem. So that's all quite clever. Um, Nicola Bryant really is excellent. You know, she I mean, the accent is kind of a sort of cheat code in a way because she can really easily differentiate these two characters. But I think she puts a lot into Queen Anne. Um, Aramem is a really great one for her. She really gets to throw her weight around. I really enjoy that. The only kind of downside for me, again, having now listened to it about 2.5 times, um, there's a little bit of sameness in the voice cast. There's quite a lot of kind of plummy British accents. I mean, it's Doctor Who, Big Finish. They're going to be British, but you know, there were times where I was having to really concentrate to kind of go, which am I listening to? A Musketeer, the King? Yeah, somehow in this release that became a bit of an issue for me. So that kind of made Perry stand out even more to me, just because her two parts are so distinct from each other. But yeah, it's a hoot.
I think this one owes quite a lot to the androids of Tara. Like, you've got to have that in
Oh
your head
yes.
when writing something like this, haven't you? But Androids of Tara works, and so does this. Um, you're right, Nicola Bryant's absolutely brilliant, and like the whole dual thing works really well. Um, I think it will probably not work so well on screen, even with limitations of 80s Doctor Who or whatever. But yeah, as an audio performance, it's absolutely excellent. Um, Other than that, it's a relatively sort of standard historical. It's not doing anything big and wild. It's just, yeah, we're going to land the TARDIS here. This is what's going on at the time. TARDIS crew gets involved. But the TARDIS crew does get involved in a sort of not quite normal way. We have the doppelganger thing with Perry, but we've also got obviously, Erimem is essentially a warrior. And that sort of really comes into its own here. She actually goes to battle. And everyone's like, "Oh, Aramem's a really, really good warrior." Well, yeah, we established that in the last story. Um, I as I said before, I think this TARDIS crew just works so well with historical stuff. You've kind of got Perry, who's got the futuristic knowledge, and then you've got Erimem, who's obviously from earlier in time than this, and it's still a whole new world to her. It's almost like Erimem's exploring an alien planet anyway. And that works particularly well. And it's I'm glad that they did do a few historicals with this TARDIS team, because it seems to work. And obviously, the whole idea with Erimem was she was never meant to be in universe. She wasn't meant to be a full time companion. The Doctor was just kind of gonna drop her off at the Braxiatel collection so she could learn things. But instead, they end up here, and she sort of properly becomes a companion in this one. Um, so yeah, I have to admit, when we very first started this, Perry and Erimem was one of the things that I was really looking forward to re-listening to, because I don't think there's another TARDIS team like it. I don't think they have the best adventures ever. I don't think the releases are overly special, but this is just really good, reliable Doctor Who that you can have a bit of fun with. And obviously, doing the Three Musketeers, albeit slightly more historically accurate in Doctor Who's a great idea as well. Because obviously it's a version of history where we know the fictional version better than we know the actual historical events. And Doctor Who's obviously able to get stuck into the historical events. But Doctor Who does Three Musketeers is such an obvious idea. I'm genuinely surprised it wasn't attempted in the 60s, to be honest. I can see Hartnell doing a Musketeer historical pretty well.
Yeah, I think he'd be a pig in the proverbial with that sort of story. What I will say about this one being somewhat, meat and potatoes kind of Doctor Who story in a sense, which I know you don't mean in like a bad way that it's traditional. Um, I think it could be seen as quite interesting because there is an implication that the TARDIS has done this deliberately to make Eramem stay, and I think there could be an argument made that presenting Eramem with a kind of frothy down the line Doctor Who story as an example of like what you could have won if you stuck around. I think that's quite and maybe accidentally interesting, but I think that's a nice idea that the TARDIS would go. I think you could do with an Androids of Tara. So let's just give you that. So I enjoy that idea.
Yeah. And it's something that I think is more predominant in early Big Finish, kind of a little bit of prescribing a personality to the TARDIS, because obviously it's been sort of responsible for them being in a few situations, or the consequences have come about because of it. Look at Holy Terror, for example. The TARDIS actually plays a small yet still significant part in its role there, and that kind of thing. So all in all, this has been 5 pretty good releases. Like I've enjoyed all of these. There haven't been anywhere I've gone, no, don't want to hear that again. I realise I sounded really down on Spare Parts. I'm not at all. I think it's great. I just don't worship the ground it walks on. But yeah, everything here has been really fun. Everything here has been a really good listen. And looking at our next 5 stories to cover as well, a couple of them are really good, and a couple of them are going to be very interesting to talk about.
Yeah, I think this whole era, I mean, if you would call two sets of 5 an era, it is all interesting. That is the word, isn't it? Because it's just like they're taking a few little swings here. They're going, what's slightly odd that we can do? And even you can argue that Church in the Crown in that sense is perhaps odd in a deliberately straightforward way. But yeah, the next 5 are going to be some ups and downs. But yeah, it's nice to approach them from the point of view of, hey, it's not boring, at least. So you're never bored. Well, we'll see, won't we?
This is
Gonna,
very true. I'll let you know when I get bored.
yeah.
I'm certainly not yet, though. Okay, well, we'll leave that there. That's another 5 done, and we'll be back for 5 more soon. We're edging very close to 50 releases. We're edging very close to Zagreus, in other words.
We're getting a little close to the cliff edge, you
Yes.
mean?
Yes. Like, is that a milestone? Well, I suspect it probably should be, but we'll see. Anyway, we'll leave it there, and we will be back for more spodcasting very soon. So thank you very much for joining me, Gareth.
You're very welcome.
Goodbye now.